So primarily, who watches your podcast? I mean, what's
Uh,
your
yeah, so I have a wide array, so a lot of meditators,
uh,
um, and then some martial artists. Uh, I would think mostly though, like qigong, tai chi people, um, people who are into Tibetan Buddhism, people who are interested in biomechanics. So my wife's a PT, and we. So these are one of the questions I wanted to bring you on for, um, because you're a serious practitioner.
right?
You lived in China for I think 11 years. It said
Exactly.
you're also a translator.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say, yeah. So now I mean, my day job, I teach Brazilian jiu-jitsu and I coach
Hmm.
MMA fighters.
Hmm.
So I'm not really into the Tai Chi kind of world anymore.
Right.
That kind of thing. So like, I don't really, sometimes people start asking me about, I don't really know much about what's going on. I only know about my training in China. So anything about that or biomechanics, right? I'm big on body method and that kind of thing. And
Yes.
I grew up doing yoga. So,
Oh, you did.
I did we can talk about it. My Kung Fu teacher as a child. Yeah. So in the 60s. So when
Mm.
I was trained with him, I'd never heard of yoga at the time, but he had like Kung Fu classes in yoga. And I was a kid, I did all the classes. So I
Yeah.
practiced yoga for decades before I went to Asia and did the other stuff. So, that's my background. And then martial arts obviously is pretty much my forte.
Did you see any crossover with the yoga you were taught by him and what was like the stretching practices in the
Yeah,
martial arts in China?
absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
absolutely. Yeah, I can talk about there's different some of the body method.
Hmm.
It was quite, it depended on the teacher, but I feel like my best teachers, I mean, the commonalities were far more prevalent than any discrepancies. Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I feel a lot of um, what we would in the Chinese martial arts would call internal practices probably came from India.
Oh, you think?
I think, yeah,
That's
yeah,
always a question I'm looking to scratch to figure
yeah.
that out.
I mean, not to the extent of like Dhamma, one guy brought it and taught,
Right,
but
right, right.
there was a lot of even in the old Kalari and those things, like the idea of having long link forms. I think a lot of that's probably Indian in origin.
Really?
So
Okay.
it's probably a big India had an influence on everyone in Asia when it came to philosophy and that kind of physical training, right? I feel
Right. Massive.
ideas. Mhm.
Yeah. But the Taoists I always thought had their own sort of background unto their own, uh, that kind of maybe meshed when Buddhism arrived in China or when the Taoists traveled to India and sort of had this cross dialogue.
Absolutely. So, I mean, they have super early practices. What people now, qigong's a new word, right? It's only been
Right.
around 60, 70 years. So you go back far enough, and you always see that like the earliest term was Daoing. So Daoing is kind of like qigong or all those internal practices back in the day, and that's old. It was. I think it just spontaneously evolved from a lot of stuff.
Mhm.
Like probably rituals, probably shamanistic things, trial and error with exercise.
Mhm.
Um, and those are Daoing is basically to lead and to stretch. So the whole idea back in those days was kind of a intent driven method of calisthenics, basically just stretching.
Yeah.
So I think probably some of the earliest exercises were to just to ward off things like arthritis, and
Mhm.
people were in shape because they all had heavy physical
Different
lives.
lifestyle.
It was more like therapeutic. So
Mhm.
it wasn't like subsequent training, kind of we would think of as martial training or anything. They were just
Right.
people who probably had overuse injuries, and they didn't have a lot of medicine, so they found that when they stretched and did certain exercises they felt better, their joints felt better, and that's where it all started. And then, I mean, like, obviously you would know that the whole um, when Buddhist practices showed up much later, like in the 900s, it mixed literally with Taoism, right? Like Zen is a mixture of Taoism and Mahayana Buddhism, right?
Right.
Or Chan in Chinese. All Buddhism in China and Japan is mixed with Taoism. So obviously, you would assume that those practices would mix as well. Yeah, but the Chinese, yeah, they had their own. You can read. There's still really old copies of Dowling texts that are available online, right? You can find them.
Mhm.
And I mean, a lot of it's a little hard to follow nowadays, but their basic practices like get up early, drink water, walk in the fresh air, and then there's specifics, and it'll be like touch your toes, 1,000
Mhm.
times. They have these huge numbers. I mean,
Yeah.
I like to tell people to do a lot of these exercises. So it's just basic hygiene and exercise. That's kind of I think where that all came from. And then I think there was a lot of mimicry of animals later. All that stuff came into play.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, the exact so same thing, you find India and Tibet's like these times were so different. Like people weren't sitting around like they are today. The environment wasn't polluted. Like we just have such a different environment with which we grow up in than these practices in which they were derived.
Mhm.
Uh, so like in Tibet, they're not doing the physical practices to the extent where they are in China. We're doing some, but their daily life was rigorous.
Right.
You know,
Right.
um,
Different times. It's like a lot of martial arts now. There's a lot of kind of really basic conditioning that people go through now
yeah,
because they're not in shape. I mean, no one back in the day, and you mean 90% of them were farmers, right? I mean,
right,
nobody walked off a farm that wasn't in shape. So
right.
you could just teach them martial arts. So, I'm sure that exactly what it was, a long time ago. Everyone was kind of in shape. They had cardio, they were strong or whatever. So you'd have a whole different focus, mostly be therapeutic.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess as you state really clearly in your books, which I appreciate, it's like, you can take these practices and you can develop it in different ways depending upon the individual's intention. So you said like for health or self-cultivation or martial aspect. Um, and I kind of want to dive in a little bit here into the idea of like the difference between like a self-cultivation and health or even what you mean with when you say health, because like it seems to me, in my experience, I've done martial arts since a little kid, but um, a lot of the Tai Chi and stuff like for health. But this is such a general word, and I feel like a lot of times these internal principles are either absent uh, or just neglected, or people don't understand them. I'm not quite sure this is the transmission of these internal principles and what that actually means, and the extent to what they are and how we cultivate them has been absorbed by the majority of practitioners in these who are doing some form or version of these.
Right. So health, obviously health's pretty nebulous as a term, right?
Right.
So if you, if you look at, I feel like a kind of a simplified look at an archaic Chinese model. I mean, obviously, people like Chinese medicine. There's meridians, there's Qi, but
Right.
basically, um, I think most of that. I'm not trained in Chinese medicine, so
Right.
that's like outside my
Yeah.
realm of expertise. But in the martial arts as well, they have an idea. I mean, it's the same kind of things we would say generally in English. If you said, that guy has good color, what does that mean? Or that guy has
Mm.
vitality. It's
Yeah.
like you can't measure. You know what I mean? They're imprecise, but everyone kind of has an idea. It's robust. What does that mean?
Mhm.
That's how everyone colloquially or kind of like it's kind of a folk way of saying he's healthy, right? And that's
Right.
how it started in China as well. I'm sure it started that way everywhere. You see a
Yeah.
guy who looks or a person who looks, rosy cheeked and strong, and they're, they have, everybody goes, oh, that guy
Work
has,
all day, walk all
yeah,
day,
yeah, right.
healthy.
So, if you said, is that because their, parasympathetic nervous system's dominant? They don't know. So
Mhm.
that you can look at it that way. So uh, the way my teachers explained it was the health kind of uh, aspects of training were about there's a lot of a general idea in Chinese systems of balance, right?
Mhm.
There's like yin and yang. About too much is bad, not enough is bad. So there's kind of you're looking for kind of a homeostatic balance of everything. So now we would talk about it as systems. You'd say your digestive system, your circulatory system, your nervous system, your endocrine system. These systems. When all these things are in balance, you have vitality. You know what I
Right,
mean?
right.
You'd be healthy.
Yes.
So old ideas would they came down to a few things that they still come down to today, right? There would be in general be exercise. So are you exercise? Say you are a farmer. and you're doing repetitive motion all day long with a hoe.
Right.
So, you'd go to the Dowing master, and he would say, you know what you need to do? You need to back arch. You're going to counterbalance. This is how they prescribe exercise, right? So you'd be like, wow, my shoulders feel a lot better if I just stretch my arms back every day 100 times. That would
Yeah.
be, you're balancing out the muscular system. Diet, right? You're
Hmm.
eating too much of one thing or not enough of another. Just even before they understood vitamin or minerals, I mean, they would understand deficiencies. So
Right.
maybe they didn't know what the component of the food was, but they'd be like, you need to eat more of this, and you feel better. It was like they just figured it out, right? So you're looking for homeostatic balance, and also mentally. If you're, people had real stress, in the Han Dynasty, the same as we do now. So they have meditative practices or breathing practices, right?
Right.
And they might not understand a parasympathetic, sympathetic, dominant state, but they understood a kind of a relaxation state if you meditated,
Right.
and being agitated if you're having some kind of physical confrontation. So those things. That's basically, and then you get, by trial and error. And the Chinese were very, very good at observing. Very good. I'm maybe a lot. I mean, I'm saying the Chinese because I know that history better. I'm sure the Indians and the Tibet. I'm sure most cultures, every culture there, not a lot of distractions either, right? So
Yeah.
you'd think that in general, people have a quieter kind of life. They don't have as much going on, and probably easily entertained, more
Yeah.
entertained than we are. So they're very good at observing things, and over time, observations with the astute observer, you start to recognize patterns.
Right.
And then from patterns, you start to form hypotheses, and then you start to go, wait, how do we influence these patterns, right? And then you're off and running. So you'll have, physical regimens, dietary regimens, and then kind of mental, meditative or breathing, like those kind of things. And that's where it all started. And then you were healthier, right?
Yeah.
So they pinpoint exactly why, no, but they knew from trial and error and observing patterns. They were looking for a balance. I'm sure the Indians as well. They, like with Ayurvedic stuff, they have, you eat certain things at certain seasons, right? Or better for you when it's cold. You eat. So they just observed it, and then they over time they observed patterns or what made people in general healthier.
Right.
So that's the health aspect. If it gets much beyond that to kind of, you know strange practices, and I don't know about all that.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this underlying idea of awareness or mindfulness seems to
right,
be, without that, how do you know?
right,
And in these days, yeah, there's so much distraction.
right, right. So, and also, I feel like most of the, I mean, martial systems, martial systems, they have to be present to a certain extent, and they were later on adopted, if just for the reasons it makes you a better fighter, or
Right.
helps you from not getting killed. You have to have kind of a calm focus as much as possible. You have to be able to have kind of a mind body unity so you control yourself. Like if you ever watch um, people fighting, actual fighting, right?
Hmm.
People that are trained or they don't have to even be specific. You could be just, you've been in a lot of street fights.
Hmm.
You're used to the whole relationship, the whole song and dance. They're much calmer and much more focused, right? And
Yes.
that alone will win the fight in general. The other person might be bigger and stronger, but they get they get nervous or adrenaline to the point that they almost don't know what they're doing, and they just kind of like go nuts. You can't
Right.
kind of that thing, and then they get picked apart by a guy who's calm. So that's pretty apparent. Everyone would figure that out. Then you'd say, hey, how do I get to that state without having to risk my life twice a week or
Yeah.
fight? And then you come to the samurai came to Zen, or you come to meditate, that kind of thing. So
Yeah.
martial arts, even if you don't have any idea of health or being caught, you're gonna come to these practices or invent them eventually because they're gonna help you survive too. So
Right.
all those things go together. It's a pragmatic kind of reason, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you say that because there's so much like, the entertainment moves into the fight industry or all these things, and we're used to seeing people yell and get all worked up. But
Right.
the real fighter, like, I've trained with some cops and stuff that wanted to study meditation because it made them better cops and made better judgments when they're dealing with difficult situations. Like when it's not a camera, we need to be calm, and that's working with the mind.
Yeah. Well, I coached an MMA fighter. I mean, MMA fighters, they're tough guys, but
Yeah.
most of the things you see like in big shows, it's drama to
Right.
warm up the tent. Yeah, the fighters are pretty focused, disciplined guys. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So people don't realize you have to be able to get along with people you can't train because, I mean, it's the training's dangerous because you're sparring all the
Mhm.
time. You're hitting each other. You're grappling. You're doing submissions, and it's dangerous. You get banged up, but if you can't trust your partner, no one's going to train with you if you're a maniac. People don't get it. So no
Right,
matter
right.
what their persona is, these are highly disciplined and in general trustworthy individuals, the guys who get to be the best at it, right? And you
Mhm,
don't get that way without like a mental discipline and self-control. So
mhm.
that's whether you learn it or you've had it, it's got to be in place, so you're not going to get to a very high level.
Mm. Thank you for saying that. That's so nice.
I mean, on a grander scale, you think, well, the samurai were like that, knights in the battlefield. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just part and parcel of being really good at fighting and not getting killed.
Selling something and your daily day ends very different. And again, this comes back, I think, to all the confusion and the overstimulation in our current culture, where we even look back and we mystify things that weren't necessarily so
No.
mystified in the beginning, just because our minds are so busy. And which really leads me into the next part of the um, questioning I wanted to ask you about. So, um, you have all these specific body practices in these martial arts or in these Neigong practices, uh, and they're all sort of regardless of the system they're coming from. There's some commonalities like put your mind in your dantian or focus on the quad or on the feet and use your body in really specific ways outside of the different all the different forms. There's these kind of inner principles that kind of hold. Could you talk about that aspect of the training?
Okay. Well, absolutely correct. So, I mean, bottom line, everyone has fundamentally the same physiology, right?
Yeah.
Well, basically the same. So, you know, you get people that spend enough time on these things are gonna, in general, like just a super common example. All the martial arts I've done, you might have a different way of applying force, a different way of entering, or whatever. But when it comes right down to it, every single martial art I've done, from like Western wrestling, kung fu, judo, and jiu-jitsu, a hip throw is a hip throw. The mechanics are correct. Everyone does it almost exactly the same because that's the best way it works, right?
Right.
So that's people are people.
Mhm.
You're going to come to the same conclusions, and then again by trial and error over time, system things will be systematized, right? So it can be passed down,
Mhm.
and you're going to come up with you're going to figure out ways to pass down maybe something you discovered in yourself early on. You go, oh man, I got to be able to pass it down to my students. So it gets codified and systematized, and that's where systems come from. You have forms and basic drilling and all these things in the martial arts, and body use and alignment.
Mhm.
So there's going to be, I mean, understandably, anything that deviates too far, and you see it once in a while. People have like really some crazy kind of like theory, but they always suck. They never they can never perform. I mean, they talk a lot about things, or they do it on their students. It looks like magic, but you
Yeah.
know anybody would knock the shit out of them for real.
Yeah.
So when you see people that can really do things, it's there's going to be within a range of kind of like uh,
Yeah.
parameters of use, right? So in Asia, there's a huge, things, talk about the hara in Japan and the
Mhm.
Batian, those practices, they you know understood that originally those are center of gravity ideas,
Right.
right? Like, where's my center of gravity? How am I stable? And then the mysterious part comes, mysterious enough, if you lower your intent, you go, wow, I'm harder to push over. So they
Right.
figured these things out, right? And
Yeah.
there's an overlap with meditation. They figured out the same kind of thing. So people, you can see it, people experimenting. They're like, they get their buddy and they go, hey bro, push me. And they go, now push me, and now put, and then they figure out how they're more that's just a natural progression of martial training. So most people have figured it out. So the body use comes in. I always say it this way: there's only one best way to use your body. When you figure it out, that you'll apply to anything you do. Whether you're stand up fighting, you're kicking and punching, you're wrestling, you're ground fighting, you have a weapon, you're not going to morph into some other shape. Like if you hand me a sword, I don't morph into some other shaped being, right? I'm the same. So there's got to be one most efficient way to use your body. Yeah, and that's hopefully what everyone tries to figure out. And there might be minor variations in detail, but it's going to come out to be pretty much the close, right? Like
Yeah.
no one's going to tell you to shrug your shoulders up and collapse your structure and bring your elbows above your everybody. There's going to be a range in which everyone's going to function. Development of power, obviously, always from the muscles, not magic, but obviously there's different ways to generate force depending on like the sport of the event. That's true,
Mm.
but still within parameters. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like the hip hinge now it's in modern like Western parlance. You talk about hinging at your hips, right? So my teachers would say shou kwa in Chinese all the time, like retract your quads like you're in Greeno priest, right? So they had exactly the same idea,
Retract it,
like keep your hips pulled in. They would say retract your quad in Chinese.
the
So,
folding.
for example,
Okay.
if I'm going to bend forward, I don't round in the middle, right?
Right,
My
right,
body
right.
would be extended and I would fold from my hip.
Yes,
So
yes.
we do like universe. So I tell people, I go, it's not a hidden secret. Watch a guy throw a baseball, hit a baseball, shoot a basketball, sprint out of the blocks, and go on, right?
Yeah,
Everyone who's good at it has a hip hinge. It's just
yeah,
lift a heavy weight, you know.
yeah.
So because they're human. So now you might put super detail on how to like shift your weight and get way better conscious control of muscles than other guys have, and
Mhm,
another like level of training you'd have above someone, but
mhm.
you're still going to hip hinge, you
Right.
know. So those are the what I feel like is most important to look for first are the basic, you know overall rules of body use. That will be first. There you're going to develop depending on your events. You know what I mean?
Mhm,
Like you do whatever. So you'll be in the same ballpark as everyone else, but you can focus on things. If you're missing or if your fundamental alignments are off, you can get strong or you can get to a certain level. You're never going to maximize your own potential, though. It's possible. So I use an analogy in like my effortless combat throws about, if you have a car and the wheels are misaligned and the emergency brake's on and the bearings are all rusty and you want to go faster, the answer is not to put in a bigger engine first, right? It
right,
just
right,
shakes the car apart. It would be to align the wheels, take the brake off, and when all that's lined up, you can soup up your engine, right?
right.
So like just fundamental bone alignment is
Mhm,
first. And with that, once you do that, the next question that everyone should be asking would be, you have great forces reacting. So if you're fighting someone, that's the minor force you're ever going to, there's a minor forces. The greatest force is gravity, right?
mhm,
So you have to start to understand your relationship with gravity and the ground, like the
mhm.
platform for which like rebound gravity or use force. So
Yeah,
that will be next. And then momentum. How
mm,
can I move and generate kind of a maximum whole body force? And
yeah,
this is what kind of martial arts I'll deal with. And then when you got that down, you go, now how can I use that against somebody?
yeah,
Right? Otherwise, you can memorize kind of tricks of self-defense. Like say you go to a course for 6 weeks
yeah,
and that's all you got. I'm fine. Teach them to like, palm the nose and maybe
yeah.
some basic escape. That's all good to save your life. But if you're going to be a martial artist or you're going to be an actual fighter,
Mhm,
then, you need to start from the most basic things. Can I align my bones correctly? Do I have the right relaxation kind of tension balance?
mhm,
And can I move most efficiently with gravity? And
mhm.
then I will start to worry about the other guy.
Yeah, this is one of the attractive aspects of the martial arts is that your biomechanics better be right because you're doing it. Like there's consequences if they're not, whether than you're in the yoga class and you're just stretching all the time. There's no real test of that. Like you can develop injuries long term and not recognize that you're using your body incorrectly year after year, and then all of a sudden there's imbalances and things give out. And where when you're working with another individual, whether it's push hands or full on, uh, or even if you're doing something like parkour, actually, anywhere there's some sort of force and viscosity involved where you're taking a kind of impact, the body alignment is the first thing that has to be worked out. Or
Absolutely.
injuries, you won't have strength, you just can't do it.
Right. No, absolutely correct. So that should be. So say someone says, Tim, I want to learn, Tai Chi because it's cool,
Yeah,
or health, or I like, it's culture, whatever.
yeah.
It doesn't matter if they never even want to push hands once. They just want to learn the form.
Mhm,
If you don't test their alignment and make sure that their intent and their flow of force
Hmm.
and their body power is correct, they're not really ever going to do Tai Chi, right?
Right.
So waving your arms in slow motion is not Tai Chi.
Yes.
So, everyone that would learn from me, they would have power. I would test them. I wouldn't say there's no push hands, no sparring, no technique, no nothing. Still apply force. I push, I pull. I have them
Yeah.
push me until they understand which way the force flows and how to line up, where their intent goes, and then they can go off on their own and do the form correctly. Otherwise, like you just said, how do you know it's correct, right? You can
Right.
test it. That's the one thing about martial arts, and they're not theoretical. Like, a
Mhm.
lot of times people have uh, theories in disciplines where it's difficult to test it for, it might martial arts is not like that. You come
Mm.
up with a theory, we can test it the second you think of it,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it can be done right now.
Mhm.
If you're a fighter, it has to be done fighting. It has to be done against full contact. You're fighting. But
Mhm.
it's if you're like, and I tell people this all the time, like people that they ask me questions because I have it, and I get it a lot in seminars. I have the body alignment that I teach, that I've taught for decades, um, is a lot of times different than what a lot of people have done with whatever they've learned in quote unquote internal martial arts, right?
Mhm.
And I just have them tested. Right? Why do you not have to take my word for it? I mean,
Right.
I don't want you to believe anything. So, you get into your position and we'll put force on, or we'll, wrestle it or whatever, and you can see, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
that. It's immediately testable. If what you're doing works better, keep doing it. You might modify what you've done, kind of thing, right? So it doesn't require any danger or violence. It just requires force. Fighting is force on force. You can do it without actually trying to injure anyone, but you need to test it. And you need to test it realistically, not be trained to when your teacher does so and so, you do so and so. It's like, no, really push the guy down, right? You have a headlock, and that's what you need to train. And there's no question, especially, and then it just extrapolates upward to technique. Techniques can't be A lot of martial arts techniques are faith based. They're too deadly to practice, quote unquote, or they have all these ideas, and
Mhm.
then the first time, literally, the first time you test it should not be if someone's really trying to kick your ass, right?
No, no,
You
no.
test it gradually against more and more pressure until you can, it really works, and you can apply it. So you start off with, am I stable? Do I have balance? Can I move the right way? Can I generate force?
Yeah.
To something like an internal, say like Tai Chi, for example, then push hands. Can I
Mhm.
maintain that and keep the guy from catching my center, my balance, and can I get his to
Mhm.
technique sparring? That would be
Yeah.
the test. So you don't start off with full on sparring the first day or anything, but you've got to work up to it fairly rapidly if you're going to fight.
Yeah. And I've the way you talk about this too, it's like it cuts through like seemingly the ego. Like if you just have all these theories and you're over intellectualizing and you don't really practice with another individual, seems like you can really get a big like misunderstanding of yourself. And then when somebody pushes you, your pride is injured or something. When it's really not about that at all. When you start right from the beginning, when you say I, you're meaning like the way my body's aligned. Is it correct? And I want to know if it's incorrect. It has a nice way of like diminishing that sense of self for the art. Would you say that's a correct?
Absolutely. I tell and it's hard. We all have egos, right? Obviously, but
Yes.
you need to check it. So, I tell my jujitsu students all the time, my grapplers, it's like every time the other guy makes you tap, instead of getting mad, you should thank that guy because he pointed out, an area in which you lacked. How did he get you? Are you strong enough? Do you have better, your sensitivity not good enough? Your technique's not, how are you going to know?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like saying, I do jujitsu till I'm a blue belt for a few years, and then I just roll with guys who've never done it and beat them up, and I feel good about you're never going to get better, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, and again, within reason, but you're rolling with people, and the guy, does an offensive technique, you can't stop. You need to go,
Mhm.
"Oh, okay, you don't blame that guy. He's supposed to be beating you. That's his job, right? You're
Right.
sparring. So you use it as a tool to figure out how you can get better at it, right?
Mhm.
And we all have ego. I mean, you go home and you go, God damn, that guy got me. But
Yeah.
it's not personal. Then you stop and you go, wait, okay, how did he get me? Or how does that guy keep, you know, hitting my back, or whatever the thing is? Then you start, or you ask him, and then then you get better, and then he has to figure out how to get better, but he gets better. Right? That's how it should be. Yeah. Once you, mm, once you, yeah, you go too long in your own bubble, what you'll do is make excuses to
Mhm.
not test it, because
Mhm.
in your back of your mind, it's probably going to go wrong, right?
Yeah.
So that you kind of um, encapsulate yourself in this like bubble of safety with a few of your students or your friends, and then everybody just kind of like pretends like it works and strokes each other, and then God forbid one day they get in an actual fight, right?
Mm.
That's not how you want to be. It now, if you say I don't care about fighting,
Mhm.
yeah, I want to push hands a little. There's different levels. I'm not saying everybody has to be like,
Right, right, of course.
but you can't delude yourself into thinking that doing these practices against cooperative what that is teaching you anything about a real fight. It's not.
Yeah,
I mean, there's drills to certain, but
sure.
you've got to have randomness, and you've got to have 100% resistance
Yeah.
when you train on a regular basis if you're going to fight.
And that's a thin line because if you're really taking these arts seriously, even for to really truly learn about the body, the internal puzzle seems to be the same whether you're going to fight or not. If you're truly being serious about it, you want to find your holes. You want somebody to push on you. You want to find the problems so you can correct them and deal with them, and that's part of that inner cultivation. So, like, it occurred to me as you were talking, it's like, we do know the Mahayana washed up into China, and you get Chan and Zen, and like the 37 practices of the Bodhisattva. They're like, if somebody beat you and hit you in front of everybody, you thank them and they're your guru. You learn from that to not get upset. Like you're working on this internal, and like in a lot of the Mahayana literature, like in Shantideva, Way of the Bodhisattva, they're talking a lot of the symbolism is war and talking about the mind as a battlefield. And when the negative afflictions come, you're in a fight for your life. Like it's this. It seems very similar, but playing out with the biomechanics and these Chinese arts.
Well, if we all have that kind of divided mind, war in our own mind. Someone else is when that gets out.
Yeah,
It's you doing it to someone else, right? So obviously you can internalize all that. That's why the war image it's literally a projection of your own conflict onto someone else, right?
right.
So if you want to get to the root of it, it's in your own head. That's
Yes,
that's part of it. So yeah, the best fighters, they are always trying to find someone better than them. Yeah, so they can get better, right? Get better.
right.
So it doesn't matter on what level it is. If you want to be a combat sport athlete or whatever, or it's just meditative. You're
Right.
not being in your comfort zone all the time, and then like deluding yourself into thinking you're some kind of enlightened being is not the way to go, probably.
Yeah, and so in your book I was reading, you were talking about like the chi and then the intent, the yi, and you were so clear how I really appreciated the way you said that. You're like, it's really every time you replace the word chi, like the mystical, with the idea of intention, that's the way you go forward and develop your skill level.
Right.
And
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
So the Chinese, if you, it depends. So again, I'm leaving Chinese medicine aside. We're talking about martial arts, right?
Hmm.
So the Chinese basically, it's very like kind of this is an organic progression of them paying attention to how things work. So think about it this way: you go, it starts Xin, like your heart, like mine,
Hmm.
right? It'll be like Xin Yi Qi Li. That would be the so Xin. You have a desire to do something, right?
Hmm.
So you're never going to do anything unless you have the impetus to do it. So
Hmm.
I'm sitting here and I go, man, I'm thirsty. I'd really like to get something to drink, but nothing happens. I just sit here being thirsty, right? But I have the idea now. I have a desire to get something to drink. That's the mind part, the heart, mind. The intent part is what actually moves me into action. Then I go, I got to go to the kitchen and get a glass of water.
Hmm.
That's the desire. Then I mobilize that with my intent. So my intent goes, through my body and it starts to move me, right?
Hmm.
Well, your intent still is, you recognize it kind of as in your brain, right? Even though it's like an actual impetus to move, something happens between your intent and your body actually moving. That's chi.
Yeah.
So whatever it is, it's a cascade of, you know, uh, chemical reactions in your brain cause nervous reactions through your synapses, and that causes your muscles to fire. That's
Hmm.
chi. And then li is the force produced externally, and
Hmm.
it's a very elegant, easy to understand uh, you know idea if you don't mystify it. So it's all mysterious, right? I mean, just having a desire, where does that come from? And then your intent, that's mysterious enough. Like what, why does it make things move? I don't know. Maybe you have to ask a neurosurgeon. But it's what they did was they broke it down so that they could cultivate those aspects and then kind of improve their whole flow of being, right?
Right.
So a lot of people have a desire and then they have intent, but they're not. There's a part of your brain that pays attention, right? And then
Mhm.
they kind of do things without really paying attention, and it's inefficient. So the whole idea is let's make this as efficient as possible. So you
Mhm.
can have intent and not attention. So we've all done it. You know how you're studying and you're tired and you read every word out loud on a page of a book, and when you get done, you have no idea what you just read.
Yep.
So you had intent, you read it, but no, you weren't attentive to it. So
Right.
the idea is, where does this desire come from, right? Then you go, okay, I have this idea to do something, and I focus my intent. So I have a unification of my mind and body, and
Mhm.
whatever's happening to make me move is the chi part. Foresight produces the lead. So it gives you you start to because most people, if they never thought about it, they wouldn't really recognize that hierarchy of action. They just
Mhm.
do things, right?
Right, right.
So once you recognize it, you can look at every step, and then you can improve upon all of them. And then the big one is, so obviously if you're fighting your desires to win, or whatever it is, to do a technique, that's a kind of a given in the situation. Then it's like, how does my mind control my body to get the biggest effect, which is the force produced.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the I so it's very helpful when under my teacher used to write in China, used to write it in the dirt all the time, the stick. You got to go through, these steps, because
Oh,
people
really?
would be just doing things, or they wouldn't be paying attention. It was like, you have to really understand this process, and you can streamline your whole training.
Yeah. So can we so could maybe walk us through like so a lot of us are up here in our heads or we're walking around like this or we're thinking and we have a strong desire like okay I want to take this seriously I want to be in my lower body I want to be in the waist I want to be in the dantian I want to use my pelvis and my hips correctly uh can you walk us through that process like how we would go there because right we have the intention but then we notice we're running again we're punching again we're up here or we've lost it.
Yeah. So fundamentally, the idea would be this: you want to reduce the variables to a minimum so you can focus on them, or on one, right?
Hmm.
So that would be the easiest thing. It's like if I said you have, three computer screens, you got math class on one, English class on one, history class on the other. You're not going to learn anything. You're going to get, random bits of, so you say, well, I'm going to turn off the other two and just focus on math. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
That kind of thing. So when you reduce variables to a minimum, uh, you can focus on them, right? You can practice them, and then you can internalize them more quickly. So it's
Hmm.
kind of like, say, martial arts training. I could bring someone in and say, okay, here's your stance, here's your alignment. I'm going to throw a punch. You're going to cover your head. I go real slow. Then I go, okay, great. 5 minutes later, put on gloves and start swinging. They'll go back to whatever they did, right? It's too much input, and they haven't internalized what we've taught yet.
Yeah.
So the Chinese, and probably a yogic idea, I think, as well. The Chinese idea is, how do I reduce these variables to minimum when I want to have kind of a mind body unity? I
Mhm.
stand still, right?
Mm.
So meditation's maybe one aspect. Even if you sit in zazen or you're sitting, you have to have good alignment, right? You're still unifying your mind and body. You just
Right.
don't slump over and daydream. That's not meditation. That's not really.
Mhm.
So everyone understands, like, the shape that you put your body in has a profound influence on your intent, and vice versa.
Mhm.
Depressed people, what's the word depressed mean? It means you're pushed down, right?
Yeah.
You know, I'm elated. So we all know this intuitively. We all know this. So you say, okay. So what we talked about a little bit ago. What's the found so if I ask someone, like, what's the underlying ultimate foundation of your martial training, usually I get ideas on punching and kicking and stances, and the okay, that's okay, but the correct answer has got to be, first, it's got to be how you align your body, right?
Mhm.
That's fundamental to all your movement. So the masters recognize this, so they're like, okay, we got to get rid of whatever bad habit you have first, right? I got to
Mhm.
line the wheels on the car and take the brake off. So even if you have good posture, I mean, it's not perfect, especially in the modern world, right? We're always sitting at a desk and we're driving. So, back in the day, you were holding a plow. There's something going on, right?
Yeah.
Unless maybe we're, Paleolithic hunter gatherers, we probably have perfect posture. But
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
or you've been injured. So what's the first thing? It's like, well, I need to get rid of these misalignments,
Mhm.
right? So your brain is hardwired for absolutely perfect posture, right? So so it's that thing about like, being like a child again. You always read with Taiji and things.
Mhm.
So we're hardwired. You don't, every normal, healthy, small child has absolutely flawless posture and body movement, and they hinge at their hips and they do all those things, right?
Yeah.
So why don't you and me do it now? Well, we've learned it, right? Or we've self-conditioned into it. We're bored at school, so we're like, oh my God. And it
Yeah.
becomes a habit, right? And sometimes it's injury. You've been injured and things are well
Sure.
aligned.
Yeah.
But mostly it's not, it's just bad habits, right?
Yeah.
So you need to inhibit you can't, what we don't want to do too is force another kind of habit on top of a bad habit.
Right.
It's never, I mean, it might look okay. You go, well, I slump, so I'm just going to like tense my shoulders and look, you might, but it's just, now you got two bad habits,
The
right?
root cause is still in place.
So there, right? So you want to inhibit the bad habit until your brain's kind of like a slow computer.
Yeah.
Instead of putting an input in once and it gets it, you got to like keep putting the input and remind it. And then it'll seem like to you or me, all of a sudden you go, got it. But it's not all of a sudden. It's
Mm.
like this cumulative, input that finally adds up. So it only take maybe a few weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. It doesn't take that long. So what
Right.
do? You stand. So the Chinese have the concept of wuji, like the void, right?
Yeah.
Before taiji, before it's separated. So I don't have any idea to hit or kick or use force. I just want to balance myself in gravity, right?
Yeah.
As efficiently as possible. That's wuji. So,
Yeah.
if I said to someone that's, got maybe some bad alignment, and I say, just stand there and relax and stand up straight. And they
Mhm.
stand and their shoulders are hunched over and they excuse me, they feel perfectly aligned because your body will adapt to whatever you do, right? So it feels normal, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Bro, that's not really.
Yeah.
So you give them some cues. You say, look, a balloon. So I use a balloon image. Pull your head up,
Yeah.
drop your shoulder blades. Your belly's lifted, your hips are neutral, and you put it, and it'll feel weird to them, but it's correct. Hey, listen, all I want you to do 5 or 10 minutes a day is go into this position and just stand there. Just
Yeah.
relax as much as possible and stand there. And 3 weeks later, it's their natural state again because their brain goes, oh, he wants me to have good posture again, right? You're hardwired for it. You're not trying to impose another habit over a bad habit, right? You will literally get rid of those habits.
Yeah.
Remember that a habit is what you do the second you're not paying attention.
Yes, and mindfulness again.
Right. So once you're done, you're going to go back, but you remind yourself enough, and you'll pretty soon it becomes your natural state again. That's
Mhm.
step one. Step two now, and that would be the beginning of what we would call health as well. Your joints are lined up. You take pressure off your organs. Your
Yeah.
parasympathetic nervous system can kick in because you're not stressed from the posture. So it's healthy, right?
Yeah.
Besides being the foundation for like kind of like most efficient movement. And then the next day, that might be enough. Maybe they go, I'll just do this every day. I feel great, right?
Yeah.
Then you say, okay, and that would be something like, he studied Alexander technique, he's got let the neck
And
do the head. So he did it from the crown of the head,
yeah.
different people have different ways of getting you into the state, right? With a cue, right? That was a
Yeah.
cue. Alexander didn't say, tense your neck and brace your abs. And, he was like, because the Chinese use images as well, because images automatically, if you use an image, creates mind body unity. You imagine something, there's a physical reaction.
Mhm.
We all know it's true. If you imagine something that you're afraid of, your stomach hurts, right? It's not
Mhm.
there. It can actually cause chemical reactions. So we all know how that works.
Mhm.
So you have to imagine something you're familiar with. Is the only caveat. I can't
Mhm.
say imagine X and you've never done it. You go, I don't know what that. That's why they use like maybe being in water. We've all been in a pool, or you go imagine there's some resistance, or imagine someone's pulling your hair up, or imagine the things we can imagine, and then you kind of use that. It's just a tool though, and
Yeah.
then once you got it, you let that go and you go to something,
Yeah.
right? Then the
That's
next
key.
stage, once you have alignment, would be, where do you put your weight? Where you put your weight determines your what we'll call connection with gravity,
Mhm.
and whether or not you can issue force correctly, right? And
Mhm.
then you've got to bend your legs and your knees, and you've got to bend your arms. So that's those poses you see everybody standing in, like san sure, like a pose. Now you're trying to figure out, okay, my overall alignment's good. What happens when I go into athletic position? An athletic position in Xingyi is called san sure, in Taiji is called the Taiji posture.
Yeah.
You hinge at the hips, you bend your knees and ankles, you have to raise your arms, so then you put yourself in these different positions and you hold them now. So now your body is saying, okay, I'm finding the best alignment for these athletic positions, right? And
Yeah.
besides, you're getting stronger because you're holding your arms up and you're
Right.
squatting. There's an isometric component,
Yeah.
but
And you're
Mostly
not moving in these, you're just holding the position.
still,
Yeah,
because you're reducing variables to a minimum.
yeah.
So say you went to step one, you have very good alignment, right?
Mhm.
And then the next thing I did was, let's do these complicated forms of alignment. You will not. You will go back to your old habits. Too much input again.
Yes, yes.
Now you're studying three subjects at once. So the next thing is you get used to a few basic positions, right? Where you're connected and you're lined up and you're strong there. And then from there, you move through those positions like kind of slowly and smoothly. So you can keep that feeling while you move. That's the beginning of what we would call form practice. And then
Mhm,
you do it with footwork, and then you put that together with your hand movement or whatever it is,
mhm.
right? And then you can do forms. And then you can build up power, right? And agility and move your center. And then you have someone else put pressure on you to make sure you're still really, you're testing it all the time.
Yes.
And then some drills with someone else. We push hands, we wrestle a little, see if we can both do it together, right?
Yeah.
And that's the normal kind of progression of training. Now, all the other concepts you mentioned, chi chan dantian or isho dantian, like you're putting your intent in your lower belt, all that will be somewhere in there. Do it. Not right at first, right? Maybe
Yeah.
first you get your alignment. Okay, you're relaxed. That's step one. Because
Mhm.
I can put my intent in my lower belly and have absolutely horrible posture.
Yeah, yeah. Right,
Right?
right. Ah,
So
that's wonderful you said that, yeah.
yeah, I'm lined up first. I have like normal, like move around. Like, oh, okay. And then I say, hey, then you start to learn that's more esoteric. You go, listen, though, if you
Yeah,
can keep some intent low while you do this, it will
yeah,
help center your weight down, right?
right.
Or you can project it forward. You can put power through someone. That will be next, right? So
Mm,
there's an actual, it's not a magic thing like, well, if I just think about my belly
right.
button, no one can not, it's still physical. It's like, you
Who
still have to have
cares?
alignment to you. So
Yeah,
now it's an actual mind body unity kind of me- you know psychophysio idea that helps your alignment, but you've got to understand alignment first. So there's an actual order to the training too. So if you don't understand that, you can waste a lot of. So people, and you see it sometimes. They have these more esoteric practices, and they've been doing breathing and putting their intent somewhere, and they kind of
mhm.
terrible posture. They don't know the weight distribution, and then the average guy just takes them down the first time they try to wrestle. And they're like,
Yeah,
oh, this. It's like, no, no, no. You didn't build off the right foundation.
yeah. And I just don't think so many people are aware, like, I think I've seen more of the other than what you just described, like, that was just so nice what you just said. It was like everything I'm an Alexander student as well, so and, you're talking about the standing meditation. It's like, what feels right is wrong, what feels wrong is right. It's getting at this idea like your posture feels right, but you're not aligned, but it's your habit. And
Right.
so we just need to take some time and feel wrong for a while
Right.
and you most likely need a teacher or like Alexander had a mirror or whatever it is. You need some sort of outside reference to help you overcome this habit because it's too close. You're not seeing it.
Absolutely. Well, you don't know, right? I mean,
You don't
I
know.
I had a method called True Balance Dynamics, which is just an alignment method based on kind of the internal and the stuff I learned, and in line with later on I read Alexander and stuff. It's like literally like he'd done taiji or something. He had this idea of your
That's
head.
what I thought.
So, people like came up with these same kind of images that worked, right?
Yeah.
So I taught this alignment, some basic alignment exercises, and it had good effect for people, which is nice, right?
Mhm.
And athletes and things. That was all good, but the you know the so I got back then. There was before cell phones,
Mhm.
so I was what I started to do. I do seminars, and I would do this where I'd say, okay, line up straight, like stand up. Don't force it, just stand up however you think straight.
Yeah.
And for most people, it was horrible. Their
Right,
posture
right.
was horrible, and then I'd correct them, and they go, Tim, I'm leaning back. There's no way this is
Right,
so
right.
Polaroid camera. So I
Yeah,
take a Polaroid camera, and I would say, I put him in profile, and I
yeah,
say, just stand up nice and straight, like
yeah.
natural, like nice posture. I take a picture, and then I would, put just, it was anybody could have. I would just bring their shoulders up and have them
Mhm.
tuck their chin. I just kind of put them in straight posture, and they'd be like, dude, I mean, come on. I mean, I'm leaning back and I'm sticking my chest out, and I would take a picture. I had several times grown and had tears in their eyes. I would
Yeah,
show them pictures, and they'd be like, what the fuck? Like they'd
yeah.
look at the picture they thought was straight, and they're like, I don't stand like that. I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what you thought.
That's you.
And they would recognize the second picture as being good alignment. We can recognize it. We all get used to what we do the most because you have to, or else the input from bad posture would be overwhelming. All that, like if you have a stone in your shoe and you can't take it out, after a while you don't really notice it anymore, even if it hurts, right? Because
Yeah.
your brain can't, you can't get on with life if you have to over focus on these things, right? and it's an adaptive, it's a good response. It would be hard for us to survive as humans, but
Yeah.
the downside, like the yin and yang, but the downside is, yeah, you can have horrible posture and think everything's great. Like you need to be reminded, or you have to people test you, and that's just the way, and you can get to higher levels of it. But I was the same way. My teachers, I remember when I first started, they'd be like, you got to kind of like drop your chest a bit. And I was like,
Mhm.
I felt like I was slumping over, but really when I looked at profile, I was like, oh man, I was used to kind of like we used to like kind of brace our, abs and what, that kind of thing. And I had to unlearn it. And it took probably a year of solid training before I felt like, oh, okay, this feels, it felt, and later on I go, what does feel much better, but you get used to whatever you do.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And so I just see the similarities here. It's like this internal work that's constantly taking place on on a quote unquote real actual practitioner who's seriously interested in efficiency or mind body connection or whole body connection. Anytime you have kind of like this driving desire to figure this thing out, um, I do feel like it does diminish the ego to get to the goal, whether that's somebody pushing on you or looking at yourself in the mirror. It's like you have a problem and you're trying to solve it. But unless you acknowledge that there's a problem, like I'm leaning back, oh, I didn't know. And now once you know, it's like Pandora's box, I got to fix this thing. And you're going to do what you can. And I was just always struck by, because I'm Alexander technique, Feldenkrais, lots of methods I've explored and teach and practice. But the internal arts, by the way it's presented, is mostly choreography and some breathing, but it's like, no, they have serious things to offer. Like they have their own, like you said, I think Alexander studied Tai Chi, um, or it seemed as though we did. It's like these themes seem to parallel. Like these are human, like you said, a hip check is a hip check, a hip throw is a hip throw, regardless. Like if it works, it works.
Absolutely. I think too that there's also there's rain or a you know you don't have to be a master, you don't have to be a master martial artist to get a lot of benefit, like you said,
Yeah.
a lot of times with internal training, people come to it because it's cool, right? You read all these stories and
Yeah.
masters, and you go, but at first it should be, and it's the throw the baby out the bathwater, and then you start looking around and like no one can really do these things, or you see a lot of kind of weird things,
Yeah.
and people are like, oh, that's it's kind of, they discount the whole study, right? And
Right.
no, there's a lot of really good things, even if you don't want to fight with it. There's a lot of. Here's the thing: anybody who styles are invented by someone who studied more than one thing, or there'd only be that one style passed down, right? They
Right.
made a synthesis of it, and that became a new style, kind of, and then that's how they evolved. But any of these quote unquote styles that have been passed down that have survived, now modern times maybe people aren't fighting, but back in the day they were really doing it. They're using it. It could be an old Japanese style, it could be a old Kung Fu style or some Chinese. If it got passed down, there was probably something useful there, because back in the day, no one would have done it if it didn't work, right? You have no
Right.
students. Everybody's getting killed in battle or beat up, or so a lot of it. You might say, okay, maybe some of it's lost or whatever. But if you look, usually the core foundational principles is what you want to look at.
Yeah.
Then that's where the real value will be found, right?
Mhm.
Whether or not people remembered all the ways to throw a guy or hit a guy, that's secondary to
Yeah.
So there's a lot of really good, you know these guys spent a lot of time on this stuff, right? And it was serious
Yeah.
for them because it kept them alive. So they weren't, yeah, you don't want to discount things at first just because they seem archaic and a little weird, right?
So you took that. So this is, having you on the show. I was so excited because you actually did take the time. You went to China. You studied with these authentic teachers. Um, and then you embodied this and you brought it back. Is there other things you think like we're missing? Like this? So you're part of um, the transference of knowledge here. You're a
I,
vessel for the information. So is there anything?
no, I mean, there's a lot of good teachers and a lot of good. The one advantage I had was I fought in the ring. I did Sanda when I was in Taiwan, right? And then I came back and learned jiu-jitsu, did early MMA. I fought a lot. I did a lot of grappling tournaments and and I taught people to fight. I have MMA fighters. So the one thing I had was my whole idea from the early, it was just when I was a kid, it was self defense, right?
Mhm.
And then when I learned the other stuff, it was, I mean, I like the body method, all that stuff, but I wanted to fight and see if it worked.
Yeah,
So
me too as a kid. That's how
that
I
what
read it.
it gave me was a clear perspective because I got to test it.
Yeah.
I got to test it. So you know, there, there, and a couple things. So, and this is me. I mean, everybody has their own background and whatever they did, right?
Yeah.
So what I found was, like I just talked about, a lot of these core foundational, maybe esoteric sounding principles
Mhm.
were absolutely, the best kind of. They were spot on and they were absolutely
Practical.
useful.
Yes.
And then you run into things, extrapolated from which were not right.
Yeah.
Not so. My advice to people, depending on their goals, right,
Yeah.
is to seek out, or you want to really pay attention to what are the essence of these teachings,
Hmm.
the foundation of the teaching, right? And it needs to make at least a certain amount of. You shouldn't have to take too much on faith. You have to take some things on faith because you've not done it, right? But if I said to you, yeah, if you go to the gym with me 3 days a week and I have you lift weights, you're going to get stronger. Who's going to go? I don't know, buddy. Is there any examples of that in the real world?
Yeah.
So there's got to be some real world examples of what they're talking about, like,
Right.
or can they do it? If someone says, "Oh, I've done this and that, and I have these powers or whatever," can they do it on you? Can they do it? Really, if you're honest with yourself, it's not hard to discern, right?
Right.
So, and it doesn't mean they're the best fighter in the world, but if someone says, I can, these practices will make you more stable, they'll make you strong, they'll make you whatever, and they have absolutely nothing real to back it up. It's not true. Or it's not going to be
Right.
true. Right? So you want to be polite, to people, but it's got to make a certain amount of sense.
What's your life and it's your time.
Yeah, exactly correct. And you can get off on the wrong tangent; it could be bad for you as well.
Yeah. Exactly.
So look for the core principles of things. The guy espousing these principles should be able to, or the person espousing principles should be able to, like, at least demonstrate them, right?
Yeah.
Realistically. So that's what I would look for. And then it's going to always go back to, body use and then application of that power. So are you getting stronger, like with a capital S? I don't, you don't have to necessarily be getting gigantic muscles or something, but
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
are you getting, like, all round stronger? Like, are
Yeah.
you more coordinated? You balance better? Your mind body unity stronger? Can you generate more of whatever kind of force you're working on? When you push hands and or spar or wrestle with people, are you getting better technically at it? And it's on you as well. I mean, the greatest teacher in the world, it's not like he can just give you you know, give you that. You've got to practice too. So,
Yeah.
you've got to take response. And if you're not practicing hard, you can't expect to have the same outcome. But if you're learning these things and you're putting a lot of time into your training,
Hmm.
you'll be getting better. And the other thing is, are all those other students good?
Right.
He has one standout because he's a super athlete or natural athlete. He's not a very good teacher, right? I mean,
Right.
most people should be getting to, the people that train hard with more talent will get better, but everybody should be getting it to a certain extent if
Yeah.
the teacher, and I would look for that.
Yeah.
And then, you just put however much practice, correct practice you put in, you'll get, that much benefit back.
Yeah. What I like about the thank you for that. What I like about the I think it could be a deficit in the West. So with these Western practices on biomechanics, like Alexander, well, whatever, there's a whole slew of them. But and compared to like the Chinese, these particular practices, they spend more time understanding. They have some kind of understanding of the mind. Well, I feel like in the West we're generally confused about this. So like intention, thoughts, like awareness, it's sort of it's bungled. And so it's hard to convey these inner principles because we don't have the mechanisms to go in a in a in a dependable vehicle because we don't have that information. It's like, well, what are you talking about? Mind, brain? Well, where? What are you talking about? You know what I mean? We're over there because of Mahayana or Taoism. They had these blueprints already laid down. So when we enter into the body practices, there's a clear way forward. That,
Yeah. I mean, in the West athletics is more, I mean, they do have, maybe not to the same, maybe not from the same angle, but I mean, if you go to a good coach, they'll have, I mean, they'll start usually obviously with the body more, but
Mhm.
it'll come in with the training. There'll be ways to get there, even if maybe they're not as direct, right? Maybe they'd be quicker if you had a little firmer understanding of kind of how intent works and mind body unity and that
Yeah.
kind of thing. But they'll be there. But you're right. I mean, obviously, the emphasis is probably more from the physical to start. Good coaches, they produce world class athletes. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's
Damn
just
right.
it's from a different. Now it depends on your goal. If you say, "Wow, I'm all stressed out and I really just want to kind of like relax and kind of kick in my parasympathetic state and I whatever." I mean,
Mhm.
you're not going to go to like a famous football coach. I mean, that wouldn't be the
No, no,
you know,
no.
that would be the point. So you got to also be clear on your goal. But
Right.
yeah, they, obviously there's a longer kind of tradition in the East of those kind of practices. Yeah, that's true. And the one thing I mean, I found too, it's very interesting, like about like combat sports, for example. Just the fact you have to spar every day with people that are really trying to beat you.
Hmm.
A lot of these things fall into place. This is where I formed my theory of. This is probably how like these original masters way back in the day came up with these esoteric theories. I don't think they were wandering through the woods and had an enlightenment experience. I think they were fighting,
Yeah.
and these things then became apparent because I
Uh-huh.
see it in students that have no idea of anything that we just talked about. They
Oh,
get to
interesting.
that level quickly because they're fighting,
Uh-huh.
they're sparring all the time.
Yeah.
So that getting out of your comfort zone and testing yourself thing will also do the trick.
Mm.
Now, it would be more efficient if you had another method, probably, but you're still going to get there.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. That's wonderful. I hadn't thought about that. Thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. Okay. So that's about an hour.
Okay.
That was good. I don't want to keep you longer because I know you are on a tight schedule.
Yeah, I
Uh,
appreciate it.
that was wonderful. Thank you so much. I love the practicality of the whole thing.
Oh, thank you.
I
Thank
would
you.
have given anything to meet you when I was 20 and study under you.
Thanks. Yeah, that was it was good. Very good questions.